I'll just hit the recording there. Yeah, I'd like to welcome Anthony Murphy to speak this evening. Welcome, everyone. Over to you, Anthony.
Awesome. Thank you. And just the meetup thing, just talking about having a beer and stuff, that's something that we were talking about before, the disconnection of remoteness. And I was saying to Rowan, I've been really bad since we've gone, all the meetups have gone remote. I used to try and do a meetup a month. That was my budget with the wife and the kids, but like haven't been doing it now, and I probably should really get back into it. So I was really keen when Rowan reached out and was like, hey, you want to do something? I was like, yeah, especially for this. Now, we'll see how long this goes. I think it'll be about 20, 30 minutes of talking. I'm going to try not to just talk a lot at you. I'm not sure how long this is going to completely go, because this was me cutting up a existing kind of presentation and bastardizing it a little bit for this, but hopefully it's smooth and it's good. So try not to talk too much. I'm really keen for the discussion, really, mostly. That's my style, I guess. Let me share screen. Let me hit play. Can you see that? Yeah, thumbs up, good. All right, so we're going to talk about product thinking. We'll talk about what it is, talk about how it kind of looks a little bit. I just, in that introduction before I even thought about something, that we'll see how we go on time. Maybe I'll get my iPad out and sketch something out that I thought that would have been cool to add into this, but it's not in there, but we'll see. Cool, so I'm particularly passionate about product thinking. I'm particularly passionate about the product space. And a lot of that has come from my own, I guess, my Agile journey as well. And, you know, product and product owner rep, it sometimes gets inside certain buckets. And I did this talk at Lean the Product, and it was inspired by kind of all of that. Product and project kind of tension between the two of them exists a lot, and often product places that want to adopt Agile or have product owners and stuff don't fully grasp the concept, and they still live in these project worlds. And we'll talk a bit more about that. And really, if I was to surmise that into a better sentence, Teresa Torres said it really well. She said a product team's job is to create value for the customer, which I think we can all agree on. And this is rarely done by fixating on a list of ranked ideas, right? So it's not just about having a backlog and managing it and how well we prioritize it. There's a lot more around it. And I guess if I was to think about what I hope I can achieve in the next 20 to 30 minutes, I hope I can achieve expanding your, I guess, perception of what product ownership is and what good product is, and how some of these things fit in your kind of world. I want to kind of expand that so you think of it a bit more broadly. So to do that, let's define what product thinking is a little bit. So Rowan said it, I said it just then as well. Projects versus product is often this nice dichotomy that works well, that people talk about. So if you think about it this way, from a project standpoint, projects are generally focused on an output, and we're generally focused on building a plan that fits that output. So it's about scoping, it's about defining, working out what we need to deliver. Now build a plan to deliver it. As a result, projects often have a beginning and an end. They're quite finite in that sense. It's deliver and ship, move on to the next thing. The things that we manage there, and especially things around status reporting, metrics and all that, are generally centered around time, budget, resources, and the delivery. So things that you often see, status updates about how we're tracking, milestone tracking, project plans and ticking certain tasks off. It's all about producing these outputs. Product thinking on the other side is not so finite. There's not a start and an end, because products evolve. We don't just ship products anymore. And even arguably when they are physical products, we don't really do that either. We keep working on V2 and working out how we can enhance it. As a result, we focus more about the vision and what do we want to achieve and what do we hope to achieve with it, the outcomes that we're trying to drive towards, which means that we're more focused and about reporting and thinking about goals and metrics and outcomes. and things like market fit. How is it performing in the market? How are users using it? We become more data driven around that, which is more outcome centric than output. And what I mean by that is we're looking at, just because we built this great thing doesn't really matter. What we care about is, are people using it? Is it solving their problems? Is it actually being adopted? Is it driving business outcomes for us? So we're more focused on reporting on those things. So how much time and how much budget, and I mean, budget and time are also considerations, but they become less of a consideration. If it took us longer to get somewhere, but the outcome was right, that's okay, rather than getting there, doing something fast and not achieving the outcome. You can also see how Agile fits really well in all that, right? Like the process of iteration and everything is suited well to Agile. And that's kind of, I guess, where it all kind of sits, this build, kind of measuring and learn and side of the fence. To expand that a bit more further, we start to move away from outputs to outcomes in this product world. We move away from delivering some set of business requirements or needs to actually solving customer problems. So it's not about what do our stakeholders want and need. It's about, well, what does the market need? What does our users need? Which means we move away from specifications and we move towards experimentation. We want to try things, try new things. We want to measure, did it work? Did it not? We have less handoffs. We need more collaboration. I was talking with a product manager this morning, and he was talking about how he learned that lesson the hard way the other week. He just wasn't getting any time with the engineers and the team. And as a result, he was coming up with these things, and then they were looking at it and they're like, oh, we're not going to do it that way. We'll do it this way. It'll be much easier. And he's like, oh, crap, I just worked 2 weeks on doing that. And you just shot it down or came up with a better solution. But that's what we want to focus on. And we also move away from trying to deliver things faster to learning faster. And yes, you can learn through delivery, and I'll talk a bit more about that. But there's more of a focus on learning. How does some of this look kind of day to day? Well, I love this GIF as a way to visualize outcomes over outputs. So if you're not clear yet, if you thought about this person as saying, like, your job's to empty that pallet, do it as quickly as possible. He's doing a bloody good job at that. And he's emptying the pallet really fast, and that's great. And if he was measured on that success, good on him. Give him a big fat bonus and a promotion, and he can go on his way. But if we focused on the outcomes, which is probably arguably ultimately where those packages are meant to be delivered, and also with how he's throwing them, we probably want them to arrive in a good state, high quality, not be broken. If we measured this individual on that, they're doing a terrible job. And it wouldn't matter if it took him 5 times longer to empty that pallet. We've actually achieved the outcome that the customer and the business and stuff wanted. So first step that we often do is we want to define outcomes. This comes from Bruce McCarthy, and he has a company called Product Culture. He wrote a book called Road Mapping, something around road mapping. Name slips me for a second there. But he created these 3 buckets. It's just a good way to, obviously this isn't exhaustive, but it's just a good way to frame what some of these outcomes can look like. And often outcomes are done in this form called objectives and key results, also known as OKRs, but don't necessarily need to get deep into that. But we start to focus on these things like in customer lifetime value, and are we growing our market share? And we're not just fixating on deliver X feature by X date. And once we have those things, we need a way to start to determine, well, what do we do next? Everything kind of ladders up to that outcome. It all kind of goes back to that. It's less about dreaming up ideas and creating a plan around it. It's about having an outcome, and then you can see here building experiments around it. You know, with Teresa Torres' opportunity solution tree, it's all about experimentation at the end. But even impact mapping is a great way to do this, a great tool to start with an outcome, break it down, and then work out, well, what do I need to do to achieve that outcome? And what small steps can I make towards it? And as we make those small steps, we work in an iterative way, naturally. And this is a very famous Standish chaos report around the fact that 45% of features are never used. Being 10 years old, I think the stat would have changed a bit there. But why I bring this up is because when you start with the outcome, we're not starting with building, right? And sometimes if you start with building, and build, measure, learn is good, we sometimes end up building things that are not needed. And yes, that's a great way to learn, just as Microsoft did with this little fella that most of us, I think, should remember it. It's not always the best because we end up building something that's not necessary. And great, we learn, but think about how much money Microsoft spent on that. I want to also flip this a little bit. And when you start to think about being a bit more outcome oriented, product thinking world, I want to challenge you to start with learning. If there's ways that we can learn about how we might best achieve those outcomes before we even start coming up with ideas. And sometimes those learning is coming up with ideas, but then finding ways to quickly learn about them, like build a prototype and test it, or spend time with our customers, interviewing them. But really starting with learn to then build something can be a better cycle, and definitely more of a product orientated one. In fact, as a fun fact, the new product development game, which Jeff Sutherland and Ken Swaber took the name Scrum from, they talked a lot about this. MVPs, build, measure, learn was very integral to everything they talked about, but they were focused on learning first, and how do we learn more about our customers to then build something that is good and what they want, and still have experimentation within that. So not a new concept. So as a result, in order to learn and in order to achieve business outcomes, we need to do a lot more than just this quadrant down here. Right, this is a lot of the build side of the fence. This is development, and this skills matrix is something from the Association of Product Professionals. And I want to bring this up because I want you to think about product ownership too as almost this whole diagram, and not just this corner. Right, it's not just about building a roadmap, prioritizing it. It's about a lot of these things. Some of the ways we can learn what's the best thing to do is by doing some market analysis, understand what our customers want, doing customer research, things that are in that top left-hand quadrant. We need to understand the business as well, which is in the top right-hand quadrant. We need to understand what strategy we have, and maybe we need to even build a strategy around achieving those outcomes. And that sometimes can be enough to already filter out ideas. I often find places that struggle with prioritization, they always say, oh, prioritization is so hard here. It's generally because they don't have a strategy. They don't have an anchor to hold them on. And that's why prioritization is hard, because in the end, they just have this list of ideas, and there's always a million ideas to do. It's a really long list, and they just have stakeholders and people arguing over which idea is better. And arguably, you could almost justify any idea is good, but without having a clear, anchor point, a vision and a strategy that says we're going in this direction, becomes harder to filter those ideas out. And this is kind of this whole product ownership. Like if you think about owning a product, it's not owning the development of a product or owning the backlog of it. It's owning the product itself, which includes some of these things. What's the branding? How is the product positioned in the market? What is the state of the market? Should we be playing in that market? Should we expand to other markets? What service are we giving? What experience does it have? And experience and service, think of it too as more than just the UI or what users use. It's also the call center. Sometimes that's enough to make people stop using your product because they keep calling up and they get terrible support, so then they just stop using it. So then if you think about it from a product point of view, well, how do I increase my retention or lower the churn as outcomes? Well, maybe it's not even building a new feature. It's actually increasing or giving better customer support, better turnaround on when a customer emails about a problem, and how long does that take that they get a response. You're not even touching software in that sense, and you can actually impact that outcome. You can decrease churn and increase retention. And then naturally the development of it and how do we build it obviously is part of it as well. Which means that We also want to be familiar with concepts like this too, which is the 4 Ps of marketing, often is what it's called. I actually learned it doing marketing at uni. Never realized that that was going to be useful later in my career, but it's like about the product. What features does it have? What is the product? How is it priced? Pricing is also something that can impact how often people use it, or what they use it for, or whether they even sign up for it in the first place. How is it positioned? What are the competitors doing? How we position in relation to that? How are people finding out about our product? Again, a lot of things that have less to do with features and functionality and more to do with the product itself and how it sits in the market and how people perceive it, use it, find out about it. And to drop in some tools that you can use, you know, in order to understand some of that, you need to understand the market deeply. This is a good book, and you can download the go to where-to-play.co. You can actually download these 3 canvases, the market opportunity navigator. But this is all about mapping out the market and mapping out where the product sits within it, and what are our strengths and what are our weaknesses, and what should we double down on? What should we pursue now versus later, and what are our competitors doing? And this is some of that learning that I'm referring to. You haven't even touched software yet. You haven't even thought about building an idea. You're learning. We're learning about the market. We're learning about what our competitors are doing, how we positioned in it, those types of things. And then from there, you can come up with ideas and solutions that align to that based on that information, as opposed to throwing something out there and hoping for the best, which is a good strategy. And it's also a strategy that is good, well suited to certain things, but you can spend time doing things like this. Another place that project thinking definitely falls down is the product lifecycle. So if you think about projects, because they're finite, they don't take any of this into consideration. There's development or delivery. Well, really, there's scoping and requirements and design, and then there's delivery, and then there's release. We're not thinking about where the product is in its life cycle. How should we release it? What needs to be involved in it? And if that release happened at that first stage, which is product development, and then you released it, well, you've released it and then kind of walked away, and I hope it's going to make us a lot of money. You're not managing it, you're not maintaining it, you're not improving it. This is where product thinking excels, because we think about how do we bring the product through this life cycle, and also ultimately avoid decline. Product thinking means that we're honing in on this, and we're trying to constantly innovate the product and constantly enhance it and make sure that we're not falling into decline. If you ship it and forget it, it's going to fall into decline. It might not even make it to that last stage. It might not even get off the ground, right? Because you haven't actually focused in on it or improved it. But by seeing it as a thing that needs constant nourishment and maintenance and growth, then you will avoid it, and you will get it through this life cycle, and you will continue to extend the life cycle. Just on that note, I threw this one in because I thought it was definitely an interesting piece of the puzzle too. In a project world, they completely disregard this whole concept of product market fit. It's the build it and they will come kind of mentality, or I know what the market and users want and need, so we just need to scope it, we just need to build it, and they will all buy it. When in actual fact, that's actually seldom what happens, right? In fact, a lot of research suggests that product market fit is one of the top reasons why products fail, because people do this. I always think of Segway as an example. Segway is always one that comes to my mind. The people who created the Segway, they were brilliant engineers. They had this really great technology, and it's true, gyroscopic technology to hold the thing upright, and you needed 2 wheels. You're not going to fall over. Brilliant technology. No market, no fit outside of, I guess, tourism, where you see them floating around these days. But not all of us are zooming around on Segways because there was just not a market for it. It was expensive, it was heavy, it was etc. They could have pivoted though. If you think about things like electric scooters these days, or electric bikes, super popular everywhere. there's no reason why they couldn't go that way. But they were so fixated on that gyroscopic technology and their brilliant engineering that they failed to see the obvious in front of them, which was just take the battery and stick it on a scooter. And this is really what product market fit looks like. You iterate your way there. You're never going to get it right the first time. So from a project mentality, you limit yourself in having this opportunity to iterate and find product market fit. I'm sure the people who created Segway, there's probably plenty of learning they could have done before they spent millions of dollars building the Segway that could have stopped them from doing it. But even that aside, you launch a Segway, it's not working, you're not having product market fit. Well, let's pivot, let's change. And that's it. You can test this. I just threw this in as well. Sean Ellis test is the most famous one in this space. This was based actually on research that he did and his VC firm did. So it is backed by research, but it's also not 100% definitive. But really, you can use this question on even just new features in your product or existing features. You can ask people, well, if we remove this feature, how would you feel if it was removed? And you're basically looking for people that have a large majority to be saying very disappointed. Then you know that it actually is solving their problems. People are using it. It's providing utility. And to kind of surmise all of this in a way, the cycle starts to look more like this. This is from Jeff Patton, and this is a new way that he visualizes it, and I really like it. You can think of it less as just like a discovery delivery. A lot of people know what discovery is, but it also includes sensing and understanding that data and learning it. That's kind of where that learning goes. And you can see all the ideas and options there, which then filter into your vision and strategy that I was talking about before. If you don't have that vision and strategy, you just have that really long list of ideas, and you're trying to take all of that into discovery and delivery. And that's what companies often do. And it's a nightmare for them. They feel like they have a prioritization problem, but it's actually a vision, goal, strategy problem. They're lacking that side of the fence to filter it. Then you start to build hypotheses, test things, build experiments, and then you respond at scale from a delivery point of view. Jeff likes to say, nail it before you scale it, which I think is always a great way to do that. And as a result, you're learning. You start with a problem, not a solution. And some of that thing I talked about before about that learning, you can learn through interviews, observations, rough prototypes before you even kind of get to the other end of the spectrum. And it's also because you're also testing out that problem. Does that problem actually exist? Or did I just dream it up? Or am I the only person that the problem exists for? Which also means as a product owner, you need to get really good at doing those skills, researching, interviewing people, going out there. And just as a bit of a benchmark for you, Jared Spool, which I should have put his name on this. This was a late addition and I didn't actually put his name on it, so I apologize. But Jared Spool's research showed that teams that spent a minimum of 2 hours out of every 6 weeks with their customers saw greater improvements in their experience. And teams who met their customers even more frequently had even better results. So there is a direct correlation between time with your customers, time doing research, and delivering better experiences and better outcomes. Proven. So his benchmark was 2 hours every 6 weeks, because his research also showed that when teams, that was like, so you can think of it like a waterfall ledge. So once you hit that 6 hour mark, there was a significant 6 week mark, apologies. There was a significant drop off. So if you spent 2 hours every 8 weeks, you might as well only spend 2 hours every 12 weeks. There wasn't a significant difference between that, but the 6 week mark and within that was a significant difference. And as a result, I like to think of coming up with ideas like you're right, but testing them like you're wrong. Assume that when you come up with it, assume you're right and go at it like that. But then also go into time with your customers, time looking at the market and your competitors like you're wrong. And if you can if it can survive that test, if you can try and prove that you're wrong for like a day or two and it's still standing there saying that it's a good idea, then it's probably a good idea to do. Just to use another Jeff Patton quote to kind of bring this all to a bit of a close. As a result, I've talked about a lot of things and all that. And nobody is this magical person that is brilliant at marketing, brilliant at development, brilliant at running businesses, brilliant at doing customer support. So whilst you may have a single product owner, you might have a single person leading it, product ownership and really ultimately product success and team success and great business outcomes is a whole team responsibility. So even in that previous picture, and I actually want to go back to it now, like, can I do this on this? Where's my mouse? So like, these two are designers. That's the product manager down there. Like we even had an engineer with us as well, but like, you know, bring the whole team on it. It's a whole team responsibility is really what it is. And put in a shorter way, I like to say product is a team sport, really. It's just not one person. It's not, everyone has a piece of the puzzle to kind of play and chip in. That's all I had.
Yeah, let's thank Anthony. Thank you. And you can unmute or do the thumbs up or party. The party one there. Yeah. Fantastic. Do we have some questions? Perhaps Derek, you could.
Yeah. So, folks, can I invite you to add your questions in the chat window, and maybe have a person can be so brave just to kick off a question, if you'd like.
I'll kick off. I'll say something. Firstly, great presentation. Thank you very much. And yeah, really speaks to something that I'm fairly passionate about. I think, and maybe I guess it's about, the question is around, have you got any strategies for trying, obviously when we're down in delivery and we are at the end of that kind of process, and you want to try and pull product thinking through, but actually you're being tasked with delivery and time frames and making sure that you're, you know, all those things that we do. How do you kind of try and push back up the funnel, if you like, and try and educate and those sort of things? Any tips or anything in your experience to help with that?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the hardest is when it's pushed on you, right? Like if you're still expected, people are micromanaging you almost for your task deliverables, those types of things. Extremely difficult. Some things that I've had success with in the past is just starting small and starting with, for example, one thing I've had success with was we just started measuring outcomes. That was probably the easiest thing that wasn't going to consume our time. We tried to interview people, but naturally they're like, you're wasting time talking to people. We know what they want. So we just started to measure that outcome, right? So let's actually measure, let's build it and let's ship it and let's see if they will come. And then when we reported that, hey, we're on track or whatever, the watermelon project, we want to give them the green, everything's green, and then we'll go red at the end. We would then also report some outcome metrics. So we'll be like, this is how it's actually being used. And surprise, surprise, we have problems. And then eventually they started to get more fixated about those things. And they're like, hey, that's interesting. People are having, you know, issues with it or whatnot. Why is that? Oh, great. I would love to know why too. You know what we'll normally do? We'd go out and, you know, spend some time talking to them. And would you be willing for us to invest a day or two into that?
Yeah, perfect. So kind of, yeah, just start with showing almost putting a light on some of the problems that are coming out and then going back up through. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, I'll kick off with a question as well. Is that Anthony, not a new one, but I remember a chat that I had with one of my product nerd mates many years ago, and we were talking about product ownership versus product management, and he was very sort of, hey, you know, there's a clear delineation of both, and he vowed never to be he was a product manager. He vowed never to be a product owner. Do you think that conversation is outdated, or or there's still relevance?
Oh man, there's places that give it a different name, right? Places that, did you know that Yahoo experimented with calling them producers? Because they thought that product management wasn't the best term for it, because they felt like they were more conductors, producers. Like they're actually looking at those roles, and they felt like they were more facilitators than anything. And then what they ended up doing is just getting a whole bunch of film producers applying for roles, so they went back to the old term. So, and places called product lead and stuff. My view on it is, and I think there's several things that haven't done the product ownership role much justice. As an example, SAFe would be one of them, and I'm not gonna go on a big bash SAFe thing, but they delineated the two, and they said there's a clear split between them. And yes, they're bringing it back together. I'm not keeping track of it, but that I guess perpetuates it. My view on the whole thing is, if you think about the people that Jeff and Ken grabbed when they first created the role, those people were from the product management skill set. They grabbed product managers, and they grabbed traditional product managers, which sat in this, we just live in this vendor management scoping things out world. And they were like, hey, I want to give you more responsibility. I want to make your job broader. And I want to also give you the responsibility of the development side. So if I go back to what they were trying to achieve, I mean, to me, that's no different than what we often call product. If you went into Google as an example, and the product managers in there, they'll be doing that job, right? They're working with an agile team day to day, and they're doing all that. So I think some places will delineate it. Some places it'll be the same thing, just different titles. To me, it's the same thing. If you want to split it, you can split it, but I think splitting it comes to create suboptimal outcomes.
Cheers, thank you. We've got a note here from Rowan saying that in the original paper presenting Scrum to the world, it was called Product Manager. So there you go. That I didn't know.
Like a bunch of things, they wanted to have new terms to differentiate from the things that weren't optimal before, like the whole product manager throwing it over the fence to a development group and not collaborating. Yeah.
I mean, don't want to get too deep on this one, but that's the irony behind it, right? There was dysfunction in the current way I was doing it. So they introduced Scrum to try and fix some of that. Then to your point, Rowan, they wanted to create a new name for it, so people didn't think that they were just doing the old role. But then over the last couple of decades, right, product management as a discipline has evolved as well. And really, I just see them kind of really coming together, and they've just caught up to what Ken and Jeff were trying to achieve in the first place.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. Hey, yeah.
You know what, folks, let's open the floor to the group of we've got one from Daniel. So hypothetically, if you're time boxed to a month to work on a particular outcome, what would be a reasonable amount of time to spend learning in your first cycle?
I think if the coachy answer, of it depends. Like, you've got to have to build something, right? So it also depends on how long it takes you to build something and get it out the door. I don't think there's an optimal ratio between like learning and building. I would just be trying to approach it agile. What's the minimal amount of learning I can do before I can start building something? And then what do I need to do next? And what's that next thing? And I'll just do that for a month, really. If you think about dual track agile or Scrum, is what it's often gets dubbed. It's all about doing both at the same time, continuous learning, and you're continuously building. And I'm a big believer in that. You should be doing both, but don't blindly start building without learning first. And don't spend the whole month learning and not produce anything, because that's also not necessarily a great thing either, because you learn through doing as well. Sorry, that's not a great answer. It wasn't like do a week and then spend 3 weeks of building. No.
So Daniel, does that answer your question, or is there anything else you'd like to clarify on that one?
Oh yeah, it's just always easier when there's rules of thumb. You know, you can always you always have to keep your eyes open with no matter what you do, obviously. But when you're initially trying to describe a concept to someone, and they always want to know, well, what's a reasonable amount? How do we know that we've learned enough before we start writing code or something? You know, it's always easier, you know, like when someone, how many stories should we have in a sprint? Oh, well, the number of people plus 2. That's fine. Start with that. You know,
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter because you'll learn as you go. But
I mean, the only thing I might add to it is time box your discovery and your learning too. That's something that I don't see people do enough. You time box it. So at the beginning, say, how long am I willing to invest in learning on this thing? And then at the end of that time box, let's readdress it. Do we want to keep learning or do we want to move to something else? So if you had a month, maybe you invest 2-3 days or a week or something and you time box it. And yeah.
Excellent. So I guess with the crowd right now, let's open the floor to the group. Feel free, folks, shoot your questions. Don't be shy. This is the last gathering for SSUG and Brisbane UG for the year. So let's go out in the bang, team.
Maybe I can. I know.
Sorry.
Someone else go for it. Yeah.
Thanks, Rowan. Just on that comment, which Anthony was talking about, time box your learning. I was thinking that maybe potentially our customers or the market could be an indicator that we should probably, you know, go to the next phase, if not be, you know. And I'm truly respectful with all the organizations which have, you know, a different mindset or a different way of doing particular product development or project thinking. But I would say probably at some stage it's good and beneficial for us. If I'm spending a single dollar, I should get a validation in place whether it is going to make me money or not. That's how I'm thinking. Probably what I have learned, is it a validation? Go back to the market here. Whether it is possible, that's a good question, I would say. But a lot of organizations probably, before spending a single line on the code, they may not be validating. They might be biased with their thought of, you know, yes, it is a brilliant idea and we should go ahead and build it as soon as possible. Your thoughts, Anthony?
I mean, everyone's biased, even those who practice this. That's why I say, come up with ideas like you're right and test them like you're wrong. If you can flip it and just go, I'm going to just smash this idea. It's a terrible idea. Let's not do it. Let's prove that it's a terrible idea. Let's go look at the market, look at competitors, talk to customers, build a prototype, prove that it's a terrible idea. If you can do all that and then get to the end and it's not a terrible idea, then you're like, well, maybe let's continue with it. That's just one of my strategies, at least personally, to try and attempt to remove the bias. Because when we come up with things, we get attached to it. And anyways, when we do all those activities, there's still an element of bias because any data needs to be interpreted, and any form of interpretation has underlying, like, we interpret stuff. So even that is data is truly unbiased, but the way we interpret data and then use it to inform decision making is biased. So you can never fully remove it. But I would agree with you that many places aren't doing it, or they're not doing enough. So they need to do more of it to validate, or I don't like the word validate anyways. I prefer confidence. The reason why we do this is to gain confidence in the idea. So, and yes, some people are going to be ignorantly optimistic about their idea and want to just plow ahead and do it. But it's that risk kind of confidence kind of trade-off to me. So learn to gain confidence that it's worth doing, and you're willing to invest money into it. So invest less, because talking to people and doing some research is cheap versus doing weeks and weeks of development.
Thank you.
Oh, we've got a question from David, who does a delivery role, and is so David, are you there? It's a long question here, so I figured you might have a fair bit to say, my friend. So over to you if you're there, David.
You're on mute.
Yeah, it was just a question to the group, really, because there's a lot of experience obviously on this call. I've always been in a delivery role. I've been fortunate enough to work across for a couple of different companies, and obviously there's differing levels of success here too. And I was just wondering, without going into specifics or anything, but if you look at the Australian market that we work in, are there any sort of strands of key sorts of strands to success in this space? Is it something that's that smaller companies are more successful in adopting, or have you seen it being done in larger organizations, just from the experience of the group? And are there any sort of key themes to that success or key reasons for it?
I feel like I've been talking a lot, so if anybody else has experience and want to say it, I definitely can throw my 2 cents.
Maybe just a quick thought or two. I guess there's companies that get born out of a kind of product to market, I guess, context, and for them it's pretty natural. But there's lots, I guess, in Australia we've got so much in the financial services and insurance and telco and a lot of these sorts of things where, and that's one of the things maybe we could talk about as well, is like, how do you take them even toward, defining what the product is? Because there's lots of examples where they've got a business model where there's lots of services involved. There's sort of services augmented with technology. There's also the customer experiences that they're trying to have to kind of keep customers engaged and things. And, really even defining what the product is in a way that's really the right thing to structure around can be a challenge just to start this whole thing. But yeah, I think just in my experience, roughly, I think it makes a huge difference what the thinking is of people in the executive kind of level in the organization, and if they do kind of, especially if they bring in someone who's head of product or some sort of people at the executive level who champion a sort of product type approach. Seen some examples of that, and it seems to be really impactful. But also you get executives who maybe they've been there since the start and they've seen a bit of what they might have lost as they've scaled up and got more and more sort of project structures and less product focus and things going on. And I've had sort of experiences with some of them going, hey, how can we take it back to something that's a bit more direct to the product and direct to everyone organizing and thinking about the whole of product. But yeah, it's really varied, isn't it? It depends on the personality sometimes and what their kind of personal thoughts are and experiences too, because some of them coming out of some corporates, I guess they've not seen anything like this too. That's my thought. What do you think?
You said something that I thought was pretty good, which is where the company was born out of. Like what Canva's 2,000 people, last year's like 5,000 odd now. They're getting into the big sizes, but they were born out of, well, arguably last year, not completely, but they transitioned early. Born from a product kind of centric approach and thinking. So for them, it's quite easy and natural in their DNA, and they wouldn't imagine just coming up with an idea and blindly building it. Like that just isn't something that they would do, versus companies that have had decades of doing that. And previously, arguably as well, it was okay to do that once upon a time, I think. Particularly banks that have been unchallenged for decades until recently, and even now recently, the Australian challenger neobank scene has not gone well. Some of them handed a banking license in, and some of the rest have been acquired by the big companies because they've got billions of dollars and they can just buy them out. So there's not even that competition there. People need to have a bank account. So arguably they can just kind of throw stuff out there and not deliver great and compelling experiences. But I don't think it's easier for a smaller company. I don't think it's easier for a larger company or harder for a larger company either. I think there are different levels of maturity. I think the smaller companies are generally newer companies, so they're generally more likely to be born out of a more product-centric thinking approach and world. So therefore, more ingrained in their DNA, I guess. It's probably my thoughts on it.
Excellent. Rowan, before you had a comment before the question before.
I was just wondering whether how many other people, I guess, have got the challenge of trying to even figure out what your product is. Coming out of an organization that hasn't really been framing things that way, because it's one thing to have something which is sold to external customers, and it comes in a certain offering package, and it's pretty clear what that offering is. But I guess there's lots of other contexts I'm seeing, and lots of, I think, people just struggling to figure out what would we call our product basically if we were to move in this direction. So I guess examples are where there's like services where there's lots of technology platform and various tools and applications used to provide those services, and of course they've got their insurance products and their banking, products and things, but often people are thinking, hey, it's about experience. There's all of these different things that go into people managing their finances or having this, peace of mind with insurance or whatever. So yeah, I'm just wondering whether that's an issue for other people, like to get this sort of conversation to even be able to define the product more clearly, and what your experiences have been with that. So any thoughts on that?
I think it's definitely a problem for Simon at an airline at the moment, which sounds pretty obvious. It's an airline, it flies people, but then within that, as you say, there's a ton of products that sit underneath that, and then actually within the technology space, are we trying to do cost saving? Are we trying to sell tickets? Are we trying to make check-in easier because there's a cost saving there? Are we trying to make refunds easier? Are we just trying to build a good online experience? So again, there's a million sort of ways you can play within that space, and I think it's a real problem trying to define actually what are the important things, what are the key things that we need to focus on, and you do get this. And it comes back to product thinking to a part, but also exec buy-in levels. I think some of the stuff you guys have talked about, because different streams will have very different views on, obviously, this person's thing over here is the most important thing in the world, and this person's thing over here is the most important thing in the world. And it starts to funnel down into the teams rather than teams being said, hey, why don't you improve? Why don't you increase revenue through the app by whatever percentage you want to do? And we want to see, this sort of percentage uplift. No, it's do this feature to this thing to this product stream. So definitely a problem that we see.
Yeah, and just looking at the one app when there's a whole lot of things in the customer experience can be a very narrow product definition, and maybe hard to kind of look at it holistically about how you prioritize and look at the strategy around that. But yeah, Anthony's got something about Service New South Wales. Did you want to?
Oh, I just thought of it afterwards. I was like, Service New South Wales does product thinking and stuff really well, actually, from a point of view, and they're more structured around products and whatnot, and that's been quite a transformation and journey for them for the last couple of years, but they do it relatively well as a larger organization and one that's also government, so which the two tend to go together to make things more difficult, I guess, but it's they do it well too, and they focus a lot on the customer and the experience type of thing.
Do they have any resources that you can find online to get you going with some models or templates of various bits and pieces that they use?
It's a good question. I'm not sure. I feel like often with government, if you Googled it, they probably do have something. They sometimes publish this type of stuff, like how they work. I don't know of any, but yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking like along the lines of the Digital Transformation Office, and years back they were trying to put things out there to say for the public service that here's some ways to get into, discovery and some product thinking generally. But
yeah, you're right. I think DTA did, the Digital Transformation Office did. Yeah. Oh, there you go. Digital New South Wales Digital Service Toolkit Delivery. Yeah.
Cool. I've been meaning to look into this. So yeah, maybe we can all do a bit of homework and check it out. Yeah.
I've got another question if I can, Anthony. Just on career. So it dwells on me is that I've been a product manager before, but I actually haven't been a product owner per se. And so for the people on the line who are transitioning into a product owner role, what advice would you have for them to level up, knowing what you know?
Yeah, I mean, my advice would be don't fall into that build delivery kind of trap of the puzzle. That's because if you think of it this way, if you're like, I love building great products, but to begin with, the only way you're going to build great products too is by understanding your customers and doing all that type of stuff. You're not going to build great products by applying a value versus effort matrix over a list of ideas. Right. But the other piece of it too would be to ask yourself, like, where you do want to take your career, just on the career thing. And I do find a lot of product people, whether regardless of title, whether it's product owner or product manager, because some have the product manager title and they end up in this trap too, where they've never gone out and done any of this stuff. Like they've never done a competitive analysis. They've never interviewed a customer before. They've never, and when you don't have those skills, it becomes very hard to go work for a place that does have product thinking and is centered around products, because they're going to expect that of you. They're going to expect you to be able to do those things. And if you've never done it before, I spoke to one of the group product managers at Safety Culture, what's his startup, and she was telling me that she interviews people and they wouldn't even, because they've got a very clear career framework and competency matrix. And she was like, they've been in the job for 8 years and they wouldn't even pass their entry level, their associate product role, because they've never done some of these key, simple, not simple, but basic things that are a base expectation. They've only done manage a backlog, prioritize, deliver, which is a core competency. But if you fall into that trap, you're going to hinder your ability you're only going to be able to work somewhere else that is a delivery focused product role. That they want that. Only my 2 cents.
Thank you. We've got a note from Mike with human-centered design playbook, and from Super goes to the type of org as they may have UX researchers doing interviews with PMs. Thank you, sir.
I mean, totally on that one. But my view is, again, product's a team sport. You should be pairing with them. I've had UX researchers and stuff go off and do interviews, and I wasn't involved at all in it. But I always I wouldn't let that happen all the time. Like you got to get involved somehow. You're going to be steering the ship somehow. Where are they taking their priorities on what they're doing the interviews for and what type of research they're conducting, right? You got to be setting that outcome, being involved, even if you're involved at the tail end to do synthesis and get involved with what the things that came out of those interviews, and then how do you distill that into actual product priorities? What should we work on next? If you can't just let somebody go and do that without your input. I think it's important to collaborate on it. So even if the org had people like that, which is a valuable skill, because you don't want to get stuck doing everything all the time, I'd pair with them, I would say, just as much as bring engineers along to it.
Excellent.
Wonderful. Yeah, I was just going to say thank you to Daniel, Mike, Neil for sharing those links. Right, we've got some good stuff to have a look at there. And yeah, that there's increasing amounts of knowledge out there, isn't it? And things that have been demonstrated too with case studies perhaps we can find even in the public sector. So yeah, fantastic. I think we're about at 6:30, aren't we?
We are indeed.
Yeah. So I think it's about time to thank Anthony again. Thank you for sharing all that. Thanks for doing this. It's been wonderful. I really appreciate it. And thanks to everyone, for joining this call this evening. I think it's been a really good discussion actually on the back of that talk there.